We are pleased to be facilitating today's conversation, Culture, People, and Me. What does it mean to be working with diverse individuals? We will spend some time exploring the interconnectedness of cultural competence and person centeredness, how personal, implicit, or unconscious bias and culture can impact the way we engage with each other and service recipients. We will talk about the individual's families, cultural nuances that may affect how one engages, and what needs to happen in the cross-cultural encounter, and of course, cross-cultural communication. So normally we started by defining culture. We want to make sure that we're on the same page, and here's some definitions that will anchor our conversation today. What is culture? It's a way of life of a group of individuals. Culture determines the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act, the way we perceive and respond to different situations and different individuals. It's shaped by factors as proximity, education, gender, age, sexual preferences. One of the things I'd love to share, culture is learned. It's a learned behavior, and I guess as such we can unlearn some of those behaviors. It reflects traditions having been passed down from one generation to the next. We talk about experiential and inherent culture. Experiential examples like work affiliations. Inherent, you can think about religious groups, racial groups, ethnic groups. In looking on culture, we need to focus as well on cultural identity. What is cultural identity? It's that sense of feeling or belonging to a group. So you think of the black professional woman. So Lenore, for example, that's me, would identify as a black professional woman. I can also identify as a mother who is black. Here's some of the identities that folks normally use, and I'm sure you're going to experience some of that as you engage, not just with your colleagues, but as you engage with individuals who are different than you are. So you may want to spend some time looking on country of origin, marital status, gender, income, communities that individuals belong to, and political beliefs, personal values. All these different identities do impact the way we engage as individuals and also how we engage with those who we serve and those who we work with. And person-centeredness, our focus today is looking on the overlap as well between person-centeredness and cultural competence. So person-centered ensures that the person receiving care becomes central to the care process. It could be around their needs, their wants, their desires, and their goals. It really is as the person defines themselves, not as we define them. And that's very important because very often we spend a lot of time trying to define the person within our terms, within who we are, and not necessarily hearing how the individual is defining themselves. What is cultural competence? I want to focus on cultural competence being the ability of a provider to build, to bridge the cultural differences, and to build an effective relationship based on who the individual is. We have, I love these other definitions as defined by the Health Research and Educational Trust, HRET, and the Cancer Action Network. And what these two definitions focus on is attitudes, its values, its beliefs, its behaviors. How do we tailor, how do we use that to ensure that services are modified to meet the needs of those we serve? And this is very challenging. I mean, it's kind of ripping off my tongue, but if you think about what does it take or what does it mean to actually change your attitude or how you look on someone, how you begin to accept another person's values as theirs and not trying to impose on someone what your values are. and then how then do you begin to modify services to meet those needs. So this is a great slide. Nancy and I, we talk about this all the time. When you look on it, it gives you a good sense of there's cultural competence, there's person-centeredness. It's not an either or, and there's this big overlap where actually they're so intertwined. And I honestly think we need to be doing both and we need to focus on both if we're going to truly be serving someone the uniqueness of who they are. Person centeredness focuses on the person as a patient, whereas cultural competence focuses on the patient as a person. Slight difference, but it really incorporates um, person-centeredness and cultural competence incorporates an understanding of the individual as a unique being and what are the key factors that we really need to be taken into consideration. We're going to have Nancy is now going to pick up on continue the slides.
Thank you, Lenora. So we have those key terms to set a tone for the conversation. So I am going to speak about personal bias and culture. And in order to engage in that conversation, we have to ask a very, very introspective and deliberate conversation question in our own head. And that question is, who am I? Who am I? Basically, we are shaped by our childhood experiences, which we often take for granted. And those experiences are a compilation of what our parents have taught us, how we've engaged in the communities that we live in, and things that just were imparted or imposed on us as part of our upbringing. Cultural identity search is a little bit more of a critical thinking stage where we begin to question where did those beliefs emerge from and how do we hold on to them and why do we hold on to them, and then also begin to think about how those beliefs, those values that we've gleaned along the way interact with the world as we interact with it. So there's also the cultural identity achievements when you come to that place where you accept who you are as a cultural being and you begin to have a clearer sense of your identity that will help you to navigate the world as you interact and engage with it. So when we think about that, once we've identified who we are, our cultural identity, we have to understand the critical nature of the personal implicit bias that we possess inside of ourselves. And what is implicit bias? It refers to the attitudes and the beliefs that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Implicit biases are not accessible through introspection. It is there below the level of our current and conscious awareness, and it is again based on our personal experiences, our cultural environment, and our biology. It takes place inside of our unconscious mind, and it kind of relies on instinct. It's part of our survival feature to keep us safe. And because of that, we have to make snapshot judgments about our surroundings to make sure that we are in a safe situation or we are able to make sure that we can make decisions to keep our safety intact. What can it look like in an unfortunate way? It can look like stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, stigma, and those disparities that we have to contend with in our systems. Again, recognizing that our implicit bias is rooted inside of us and they are not going anywhere. That can sound rather bleak, but we have power in who we are and how do we engage with people, whether they are our colleagues or the people we serve. We have to manage those personal and implicit bias. And how do we do that? First, we have to become aware. Be honest with yourself that we have this unconscious bias that exists, and each of us has them, and he serves a wonderful purpose, but we have to manage it when it becomes illogical or irrational. So when we notice that, we use the power of logic. We start to think about, why am I feeling this way? How many other people are feeling this way? How do I use this information to avoid making decisions that may be harmful or hurtful to others? And just give yourself a chance to use your rational thought about that notion that you may be experiencing when you're exposed to your implicit bias. Hit the pause button. I call it the powerful pause. And this just gives you a moment to override that natural inclination that is emerging out of your unconscious mind, and let that rational thought come in. Create a common ground. This is a very intentional internal dialogue where you begin to value the differences and the diversity of others, but focus on what you have in common. That will keep you grounded in that conversation within yourself. Remind yourself of the need to be fair at key times. So you can use that as different cues in your life. You can have little memos or reminders put up to kind of keep you in that space. But take the time to remind yourself that it's important to be fair. And then you want to know the ongoing work is where you are in terms of your motivation to change or manage your bias. Our worldviews reinforce our biases. They are shared values and assumptions on which customs, norms, and institutions are based. They help us to determine our values. And as I spoke earlier as we were entering into the space of understanding who we are as cultural beings and determining our cultural identity, those are formed through our worldview, and those are grown through our worldview. When we don't acknowledge or recognize our worldviews, certain things can happen. When we do take the intentional effort to recognize them, it can promote mutual understanding. You are in a space where you can be receptive to differences and aware of those differences and how that impacts your situation or encounter. It can help to build cultural understanding and to resolve conflicts. You can help in a synergistic and collaborative way, co-create new stories, design new rituals, and find inclusive metaphors that contain their meaning. When we don't acknowledge and recognize them, the stronger party may try to impose their worldviews on others. And what does that look like historically? That looks like, and it feels like, oppression. Far more profound than trying to impose a particular solution to a conflict, the imposition of a worldview can be destructive to a whole way of life. So let's talk about how bias impacts service delivery. They contribute to disparities. That's critical to understand that they contribute to disparities. So if we don't manage those biases, we are being harmful in our intent to serve, and we are aiding the process in having poor outcomes for people that we serve. So we must conduct a deeper dive, because we need to understand the effects that unintentional, although unintentional and not obvious, they can contribute to disparities. We need to develop a greater degree of self-awareness to the presence of bias within ourselves. So it starts with self, be self-aware, and then we can go and make sure that we're managing it. So one of the things that I often say is that with our biases, we forgive ourselves for our first thought. The magic happens in our second thought and our first action. I'm going to give this back to Ms. Lenora. She's going to introduce to you the cultural nuances and engagement.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So very often one of the challenges that we have is how do we engage with those who are different than we are? And we're going to share this tool with you today, and I'm sure some of the things that we're asking you to do would not necessarily be new. It's probably things that you said, oh darn, why didn't I think of that? Or I've used it several times and it has worked for me. So the big thing is to listen. Really, in terms of communication on any level, we'll say you need to listen to understand. You need to listen to hear what the other individual is saying. I don't know, sometimes I get caught up into not truly listening because I'm preparing my response to what the person is saying instead of truly listening to what is being said to me. So what can you do? Ask, what is your understanding of what happened? Is the situation? What is worrying you most? And what does your family think about it? Because as cultural beings, very often it's not about us. It's about us and our extended family or our immediate family. It's about our support system. So it's really important to get that sense of what do people who are most influential in our lives, what do they think? and how this is impacting them as well. Be open. Be open, just understanding that very often it's not your story, it's the other person's story, and come to that place where we can actually hear it. Who do you normally turn to for support? It may not be someone who you and I would think about. It could be the guy on the corner. It could be my religious person. It could be my teacher. It could be my neighbor. Who is that person? For some people, it could be a family member as well. Who else should be involved in helping to who else would the person want to be in their space when you're having this conversation with them? Knowing that when the individual goes home or when they leave your place, that's where recovery really begins to happen. The research says that recovery, most of the recovery, 70% happens outside of that therapeutic encounter. Only about 30% happens when we're face to face with those who are providing direct care to us. So it's very important for us to be open to answers to questions that we ask around who should be involved in helping to care for the individual we're seeing. Are you open to seeing others to help with your care? That's also very key. Respect. Different communication practices. Respect is so huge. It's so, if you ask an individual to define respect, I'm sure you're going to get many, many different responses. But try to meet the individual where they at. Try to treat someone how they want to be treated, not necessarily how you want to be treated. So, who typically makes the decision about your care? Be respectful of that person's response. What information should be shared with other individuals? So, although I may say, Nancy, is okay for Nancy, I want her to be a part of my encounter, I may not want Nancy to hear everything. So, that's something that you would want to clear with me. Is there anyone else you would like me to talk to? I may want you to talk to my guy around the corner because he plays a role as well in my own recovery. And probably you could be that connector who's saying, Lenore has this challenge. Can you work with her, work with us to help her get over it or deal with it appropriately? Know the community you serve. Connecting with the community that your clients live, work, play, and worship in is huge. Going back to what I just said earlier, that so much of a person's recovery happens outside of that formal encounter process. Where is the individual from? What is the community's history? If I am from a community that's been plagued, that I have had a lot of traumatic events, that I'm stressed out, that has a history of racism where we feel that folks come in and take our stuff and we really don't get anything from it. How often have you been a part of a survey, for example, and you give all these answers, you never get the results of how is that information used? So as caregivers, really need to be cognizant of the community's history. What are the traditions and norms in that community? What are the community demographics and trends? What are the community's specific interests, needs, and assets? And we need community profile is. This is very, very key in terms of deciding what services would meet the needs of the community. It's also very key for service providers to understand the profile of their community, who lives in that community, what are the racial ethnic groups in that community, what are some of the things that are going on in the community. If you are living on Avenue XXX and there's been a lot of shooting around in that community, as service providers, you need to know that place matters. It mattered in the past, it will continue to matter. And we need to take it into consideration. When you know your community's profile, you can have your data systems, you can have your workers, you can have conversations, you can engage with community leaders. It makes your service delivery so much richer when you're able to incorporate all those nuances into how we do work and who you work with. Some of the things that we would like you to consider are some of the cultural attributes that really do support the way we deliver services. So if we think of identity, and we have identified like four columns: identity, language and literacy, origin, and social determinants. So let's look on identity. These are probably the ones that you're somewhat most familiar with. So I would think of race, ethnicity, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, marital status, and family role. Important to understanding the cultural attributes. It's not just to say them like I just said them, like we're reciting a poem or something like that. It's to be able to use that information and incorporate it in the way you engage. Use that information to use it to modify and make adaptations to the services that you're providing or with those you engage with. If we look in the language column, English proficiency, preferred language, I think that's the key. People usually ask, what language do you want to have your services in? I'd love you to kick it up a notch and ask, what's your preferred language? Because although I may speak English, it doesn't mean that's the language I want to be engaged in. Because very often, you want to be engaged with the language you're most comfortable with. I have to make special effort to speak slower because by nature I speak very fast. So I'd be very conscious. So how would I like to be engaged with you? Is I want to speak rapidly, and when I get really, really challenged or I'm emotionally pushed, then I get fast, and you may not be able to understand one thing I'm saying. So literacy levels, that's huge. You need to think about what if we go back to the slide with community, we need to think about what levels, what is the literacy level within this community. And you can get that information from lots of places. What is that level? Because if we're delivering services at a grade 8 level, and most of the individuals, when we look on in general, 80%, 90% of those have not gotten to that level, then we're missing a point. If people are operating at a fourth grade level, it's okay, it's not insulting. What's insulting is when you speak to someone at a grade 8 level and their understanding is at a fourth grade level. You're really leaving them behind. Most folks tend to think about settle around a grade 6 level, and I'll say sometimes that's even too high. You need to know, have a good understanding of what the literacy levels are for those you're serving. Place of birth, migrant or immigrant status, refugee status, length of stay in the county, and I want to take you to the word county. Very often when we talk about origin, we think about length of stay in the country. If we think of New York State, our counties are so very different from each other. So getting the information to how long have you lived in we are in Monroe County. So for us, a question could be, how long have you lived in Monroe County? If a person says, well, just a month, you may want to follow up with, where did you come from? And the person says, well, I lived in Queens in New York City. Ooh, what a big difference in living in New York City compared to living in Monroe County. Huge difference. So in terms of delivering services, we need to be very, very cognizant of that so that we can actually modify and talk to folks in ways in which we can help them. If you're living in Avon, that's somewhere near the Rochester area, there's very little transportation there. If you come from Queens, you hop on the subway, you hop on those buses, you get to where you're going, you don't have to think about it. So moving to Rochester or in our area, that is something that folks would have to be thinking of. Then the social determinants of health. A lot of attention is now being placed on the social determinants of health. Most folks, if you think of, folks who have worked with individuals in the community for years, they have been doing that work for years. They've been thinking of people in terms of, do they have food? What kind of food do they have? Do they have housing? Are they living on somebody's sofa? What can you do to help them? Are they living at or below poverty level? If you're constantly at that stage of poverty, what does that mean in terms of our engagement with the individuals who we're serving? And I'd like us to take a step further, because a lot of folks who we work with are probably just around that poverty level as well. And very often we don't think about that. Can you imagine? I'm coming to work every day, I'm working 40 hours a day, but I'm really living below the poverty level. How challenging is that for me to be serving others who are at that same place as I am? So those are some of the things that, as caregivers, as organizations, we need to take into consideration. How do we engage with those that we're serving? So we came up with this relationship building collaboration, I can say steps or tool. It's, first of all, we need to gain an awareness, understand the importance of cultural information to providing appropriate and patient-centered service delivery. We need to understand what we're talking about. And I'd say gain an awareness of who it is that's sitting before us. Who is this person? What are some of the things we need to be paying attention to? Um, Take the stance of cultural humility, where you're saying, I don't know you. I don't know enough about you. You may look like me. You may be from the same place I'm from, but I need you to share with me so I can then use that information appropriately. Prepare for action. What information should we now collect now that we've decided I have some general sense of awareness? What information do I need to then begin to modify the services that we will be providing to you? What information do I need so I can better engage with the community? What information do I need to collect or to get? Not just to put in my case notes. Because you know what? What we have found out is that a lot of folks do collect information. They'll ask some of the questions. I don't think we're at the stage where years ago it was very difficult for an individual to ask, so what's your race? What's your ethnicity? Where did you come from? What's your sexual orientation? I think folks are getting much more comfortable in asking that information. The challenge is, how do they take action? Now that you have that information, what do you do with it? And unfortunately, there isn't a lot out there to say, now that I have this, this is what I do. So some of it sometimes may be trial and error, but the assurance for me in that is, if you consult with the person to which you're providing care, that person knows a lot more than you may think. I will know if you ask me, Lenora, as a mother who is black, what does that mean to you? What does it mean for you and your child? I will give you an hour's worth of talk on what that means, and will tell you how I would like you to use that information in terms of monitoring how I respond to you, monitoring how I respond to the services, and also in terms of how you relate to me and those around me. And of course, we need to stay active. Continue to incorporate cultural information throughout the service delivery. And I'd say start from the beginning. When someone calls you, your organization, that's when the conversation starts. That's when you begin to incorporate cultural nuances. At that point, there's some things that you really truly need to be thinking about. What's the language? Will there be a language barrier? Does this person need transportation? Does this person need childcare? What hours do this individual work? What time do you make the appointment with them? Can they come after 5? Am I open to really truly begin to serve this person and use the cultural information, weave it into the first time you connect to when you either end services or you pass on. Because like I usually share with organizations we work with, at every juncture there is a cultural piece, cultural information that you must take into consideration. One of the truly a way in which you can begin to incorporate some of the cultural nuances is to engage with cultural brokers. I'm not going to pretend that I know it all. I don't know enough. I don't know as much as I don't know. But what I do know is that there are individuals out there who can help me with the information, who can help to connect me to the community so that I am in a better position to learn and in a better position to engage. So we have cultural brokers, we have cultural advocates. In a lot of healthcare settings, you now have advocates, and those advocates very often play the same role. So if we think of cultural brokers, they come in many different forms. It could be the minister, it could be the hairdresser, it could be a nurse. It's somebody who actually knows the community, knows the individuals you're serving, the community trusts this person, and you also trust that person. So that person is kind of being the bridge, the linkage, the person who can help you decode some of the cultural information that you're actually collecting. And now I'm going to ask Nancy to pick up with cross-cultural communication.
Cross-cultural communication doesn't just refer to language. It also includes those gestures, the context, tone, facial expressions. Those are sometimes very subtle nuances that can pose a barrier if we're not aware of them in us achieving effective cross-cultural communication. So what are some things that we can do to promote productive cross-cultural communication? Well, again, we're sounding like a broken record, but as we want to drive in the point that we need to understand the individuals, that they may be vulnerable, so you need to be vulnerable too. And historically speaking, there are certain cultural groups who just are naturally apprehensive in these therapeutic experiences. And you just need to say that, okay, I understand it, I accept it, and so let me be vulnerable too, and it could be a cross-learning experience. We need to be open to learning more about the individual. And so, sometimes I say, don't yuck my yum, which means that it may be yummy to me and yucky to you, but just appreciate that I enjoy it. And then incorporate that knowledge in how you experience me and also how you interact with me. Recognize that you are not the expert in their culture. I don't care how many books you've read, how many times you've interacted with that culture, you will never be the expert on me. And I remember in my youth, I made the mistake, but it was very profound at that moment to tell my parents that I was an expert on me. It resulted in a long punishment. However, it was very forward thinking because I am the expert on me. And you should be an expert listener and begin to learn in that experience and employ your cultural humility to, again, as Lenore mentioned, you don't know what you don't know. And it is your job to know as much as you can so that you can be a resource to the person you're serving. Communicate with respect, empathy, and appreciation. Often that has to be intentionally deliberate in how you talk, because a lot of times we want to tread in the land of being politically correct, but that's through our own lens. And so we have to acknowledge that we may make some cultural blunders, we may make some cultural faux pas in that interaction, but we can be apologetic about that mistake and take that opportunity to turn the relationship into a space that could be better, more comfortable, and again, collaborative. Be aware of the characteristics that are important to the individual to have the professional, us providing the services, know. And a lot of times we knee jerk think about the golden rule: do unto others as they would have it done to us, as we would have it done to us. And we say that the platinum rule is do unto others as they would have it done to them. Allow them to dictate to you what's important to them and where they want to go so that you both can work together to achieve their desired outcome, and in turn, you'll be able to achieve the desired outcome of the work that you're conducting. What should you know? Lenore spoke at length about cultural information that is critical in enhancing and improving the interaction with the individuals that you're working with. So as she mentioned and strongly urged, that it's not just important to collect that information, it's important to use that information to create the tone of that service delivery. And when you employ your cultural humility and respectful conversation, you can build a trusting relationship with the individual you are serving. Trust is critical because you have to recognize, as I mentioned earlier, about the vulnerable space that that person is entering into. They are getting ready to expose some things that may be unsavory or embarrassing to them. You have to make sure that you create a space where they feel safe and that they can trust you so they can present their authentic self. And that way you can collect good information that could facilitate a healthy relationship and partnership with that person that you're serving, and then thus producing a great experience and outcome. When we talk about the cultural information, what is the importance of having it? Well, it improves that therapeutic service encounter, again, building that trust. It enhances the likelihood of greater engagement and appropriate retention and care. We think about the investment that we put into individuals. We want to retain them because our intended outcome is that they get better, they achieve their level of wellness that they desire and deserve, and we don't want to find ourselves having them in our space and then we lose them because we weren't conscientious enough to make them feel comfortable in that space. It allows for treatment and care choices to be made that are more appropriate. And if you think about it, even from a legal standpoint, there's liability. If we don't incorporate those type of treatment and care choices, and we find ourselves making a really critical mistake because we were negligent in doing that, it can create a larger and deeper problem for our organization. So we can improve that treatment and improve that care and also protect our organization. It allows care and service plans to be developed that are better attuned to the cultural identity needs. People are more invested in the space when they feel it was made for them. Think about when you're out there choosing a partner, a life partner for yourself. You're not going to find yourself with someone who doesn't understand you, who doesn't respect and value who you are. You don't find yourself staying long in that space. Or a partner who isn't invested in continuing to grow the relationship to accommodate who you are and as well as insert themselves in that space. So it's a relationship. It really is all about the relationship. So essentially we want to engender the spirit of collaboration with a sincere belief that there is a mutual benefit. So we have some polling questions here for you to contemplate and consider. And when you think about, as Lenore mentioned, when you're starting to collect some information regarding the cultural groups in your region and among your service population, think about, do you actually collect unemployment rates, the birth rates, death rates, crime rates, poverty levels, homelessness, and food security? And a lot of times some people will say, well, we don't conduct that type of business where it's important to know the birth rates. It is critical because you may not be specifically involved in that type of business, but the individuals that you serve are dealing with those things in their respective community. And there's an impact on those type of things listed up here, and among other things, that will compound, enhance, or prohibit them having a good experience while they engage with you. So think about those different things, and these all fall under the realm of social determinants of health, as Lenore mentioned earlier, are critical things that a lot of healthcare professionals are giving a little bit more intentional view into, because they recognize that we cannot live in a bubble and just look at therapeutic experiences without considering where people come from and how that place interacts with their ability to achieve wellness. Other things to consider is how well are you able to describe the social problems of the cultural groups in your service area? And if you find yourself at the lower end of that spectrum, not at all, barely, fairly well, there are many, many methods in which we've introduced to you in this conversation that you could employ to help you find out the information that you need to inform how you engage with these cultural groups. For example, Lenore mentioned those cultural brokers. They have access to cultural nuances that you, as an outsider, wouldn't have. And so, for example, you may not even get entree into that personal, intimate space unless you have a broker who has some credibility in that particular cultural group that could introduce you and say that this is a safe person to share our truth with, because this person will respect that, and also create a space where we feel comfortable. How well are you able to describe the cultural strengths of the community? Well, a lot of times we get our information regarding communities based on the media, and I'm sure you all can attest that the media isn't always fair in their reporting of certain communities. So we can't just base our information from reading material or a media material. We have to immerse ourselves in that space. We have to be willing to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to accept the assertion of those cultural communities that these are our strengths and these are areas that cause us concern. And again, tapping into those other peripheral resources to be able to access that information. Go to the places where those cultural groups naturally convene, their churches, their synagogues, their corner stores, their barbershops, wherever it is. Find yourself in that space so that you can collect that honest information that you may not be able to access from other resources that we conventionally use in our field. Have you incorporate the information in conversations with your clients? So again, you collect the data, you begin to gain an awareness about the cultural group, begin to test your awareness in the conversation with the persons you serve, and that also provides an opportunity for you to affirm that the information is correct, and to collect further information to strengthen your relationship with those individuals. So we gave you a lot of information and a lot of tools and a lot of things for you to ponder as you continue to conduct your work. So we have listed here in summary the professional keys to engagement with serving individuals. Again, the work always starts with self. I have never been anywhere without me. So I need to understand what me is in that space that I'm in. So you have to understand yourself as a cultural being and how that impacts service delivery and interpersonal interactions. Ask questions with humility. Yes, that's extremely vulnerable space, because often as professionals, we don't want to expose the fact that we don't know. But the don't know is where so much magic happens, and how we can expand ourselves, our professional beings, and truly become a resource with that intention and impact with the people we serve. Take the necessary time for relationship building and the establishment of trust. The time piece, we always feel that we're always limited with our time, and sometimes it's hard to justify in our budgets the extra time it takes to do that. But it also is hard to justify in our budget when we're not producing outcomes for the benefit of the people we serve. And it's very unsavory and unfortunate when we are out there trying to apply for future funding and we have these poor outcomes. So the time is value added, and you will enjoy a remarkable return on that investment. You want to engender the presence of welcoming attitudes and behaviors. So don't just talk the talk, walk the walk, and make sure that it comes off as sincere and authentic. Utilize effective cross-cultural communication. In order to do that, again, you enter into that space a humble being and willing to accept new information and willing to be able to utilize that information to strengthen those relationships. Respect the truth and perspective of others. The truth often unfortunately, is not based on fact, but it doesn't matter because my truth is my truth, and that is the way I operate and I function. And so you have to meet the person where they are and help them recognize their truth, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, to find a way that we can get to where we need to go. Believe that individuals have a right to self-determination and are capable of being self-reliant. You are a resource to those individuals. You are not the solution. They are the solution. Document and include in the service delivery the individual's assets, strengths, and cultural identity. That is who that person is to their core. And for you to neglect to see it and use it is a great missed opportunity and a great disservice to the person that you're trying to help. So in summary, I am who I am, and that's all I can be. I am who I am. Accept me, reject me, but I am still me.
Okay, thank you guys very much for allowing us this time and space to share with you this conversation, and we're very open for you to email us with questions or if there's some clarification that you need. Thank you very much. I'm glad it stopped within the 4 to 6.